Good evening. It is Wednesday, December 14th, 2022. It is 6:02 p.m. And we are in the Nashua North High School Boardroom, and this is the Policy Committee of the Nashua Board of Education. We have a couple of things before we get started tonight. I wanted to just start with a moment of silence. Our colleagues at Nashua South lost a wonderful teacher and coach this week, and I'd just like to extend our condolences to Mr. Monson's family and the community at South High School. Okay, thanks everybody. All right, so I'll get to the roll. Ms. Darling?
Here.
Ms. Johnson?
Present.
We also have Mr. Posca, and joining us tonight are Ms. Brown and Ms. Oden. So housekeeping, I had invited Attorney Clay from the city's attorney's office to come talk to us tonight because at our last meeting we had left with some outstanding legal questions regarding policy BEDH. Unfortunately, Attorney Clay is ill and can't make it tonight, so she's offered to come and meet with us prior to our meeting on Monday night at 5:30. So if we can pencil that in, that would be ideal for everybody. So with that in mind, I would suggest that we skip over BEDH because I don't have any new information to share. Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. I don't think there was a lot to question on this. I have made the motion to indefinitely postpone everything except that pertained to the RSA. I don't think there's really anything legal because I felt, and I believe Ms. Darling felt, that we were censoring people, that we know that people under the RSA, we had to do 30 minutes divided into two 15-minute periods for public comments. That was a given. They didn't have to sign up because I was reading the RSA 189:74. You don't have to sign up. You can ask just to speak. But part of my problem is that what we're doing is we're copying and mimicking the Board of Aldermen. And there was an issue with the Board of Aldermen, as I found out, someone was telling me. This is the same exact legislation, basically, that they had, you know, with the obscene language, defamatory comments, comments threatening bodily harm, which that I agree that we should never have anybody. And other unprotected speech will not be tolerated. And I brought up the fact that it's already been determined with the New Hampshire Supreme Court what can and cannot be said. And we can't just say to people, because we don't like what you're going to say, you can't say it, because when parents had the masks on, we labeled them as domestic terrorists. They were upset because of everything that was going on.
Right.
And also the RSA says you have to be fair. So if you put a 3-minute timeline on it, everybody has to be 3 minutes, which we tend to waiver the last meeting when the paras came in. Some had 7 minutes, some had 3 minutes, some did 2. And you weren't here, Ms. Raymond, so but you can't do this under this RSA. So I questioned it, and the only thing is I want in this policy is what pertains to RSA 189:74, RSA 91-A:3, only the things that pertain to the RSA. Everything else is really a moot point, and we don't need it in there.
Right, so having heard all of your comments last time and Ms. Darling's questions last time and her concerns, I reached out to our city attorney, Nicole Clay, as opposed to the School Boards Association, because I know a lot of this language came from the School Boards Association and you wanted someone who kind of knew us and knew Nashua better. But unfortunately, she let me know about lunchtime today that she has strep throat and she can't be here. I can't answer your questions not being an attorney, and I feel like these are questions and concerns that are addressing aspects of what's the law and what's not the law and what we are required as opposed to entitled, as opposed to best practice, that we need legal advice to answer. And so the way we left it last time was that it was tabled. I suggest that we do not.
It was indefinitely postponed. That's what it really was.
The word you used was indefinitely tabled.
Oh, I believe postponed.
So either way, It's on the agenda specifically for Ms. Clay to answer questions, but as she is not here and we have not put it back on the floor, my suggestion is that we leave it on the, we leave it tabled and we don't take it up any further until we have an attorney prepared to speak to it.
But I didn't have any questions. I just said pertain, leave it to the RSA, and that was it. And anything else that was added in outside the perimeter of the RSA, which obviously we do, the two 30-minute, two comment periods, we have to have 30 minutes, and you could break it into 1 or 2, that's fine. But then there was more in here that didn't pertain to this to begin with, that was added in, and a lot of this was copy. The Board of Aldermen, why do I know? Because I spoke at that meeting and I said to them, you can't do this. You're going to get a lawsuit eventually. You're going to say to somebody, be quiet, we don't want to listen to it. And then they're going to bring up the law that came out of the New Hampshire Supreme Court. You cannot shut somebody down on the First Amendment right. And that's what everything outside of the RSA is shutting everybody down under the First Amendment right. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I'm not going to address that further. I'm just going to wait for an attorney to give us information about it. Ms. Darling?
Actually, I'm surprised I'm saying this. I do fully agree that we should. Do you need a motion to move this to another meeting to meet with the attorney? If only because I do want,
If you want to make that motion, I'll support it.
I would say, I just want to know, I basically want to have somebody sit in front of me and tell me, yes, this is exactly part of this RSA, this is erroneous that way, because I am with Ms. Johnson in the sense that the only thing I would support is what is in compliance with the law, and I know a lot of the extras in there.
It's tabled until you take it off the table, and it was indefinitely postponed, everything except for the RSA, the law.
So, having talked to Attorney Clay, her advice was that she come talk to us either at this meeting or at a main board meeting to give us advice on it. Her suggestion and my suggestion, frankly, we agreed on this, was that it should be at a policy committee meeting, but she has strep throat. I can't control that. There's viruses going around. So my suggestion is that we wait until she's available next week, when she's available.
I will not be available to come in early next week. Could she possibly come at the next policy meeting, or?
Yes, except remember that January starts a new term, and so we don't know what the committees will be. So, January is a new, everyone gets that sheet to fill out with your committee request, et cetera. Whoever's the president will assign people. So I have no control over what happens in January, which is why I was trying to schedule for her during this particular year. So it is what it is. I suggest that we, since we don't have anything to move forward on that, and we've spent 10 minutes on it, I suggest that we skip it and we go to the rest of the agenda where we can actually make motions and move forward.
I won't be able to be in early either because I work.
Okay.
So I can't get here till 6 o'clock at night when the meeting begins, so,
Okay.
on Monday. You're talking Monday night prior to?
Yes, Monday night. And I don't know what time. I
can't.
write down on my calendar 5:30 because of HR, but typically it's HR at 5:30, our meeting at 6. One would assume that she would come for a non-public with the board in there when the board is supposed to be here.
I think that was what she was suggesting, if we could fit it in for that Monday, or I don't know if it's necessary to move it to prior to the January meeting when we have possibly a new committee.
Right, that's fine with me as well. I mean, my point was only that the only reason it's on here tonight is because Ms. Clay had information for us, was prepared to answer questions, but she's not here, and so I think we should need to skip it. Okay.
I just have a quick question. If, with us skipping it, which I agree with, makes sense, if the only time she's available to come is before the next board meeting and Ms. Johnson and I are unable to come, how would we then move this out of committee and into a full board meeting?
We'd have to wait till January.
Okay.
Right, like, do you know what I mean? It would.
Yeah.
So technically, we could put it on the full meeting agenda and discuss it as a full board, but at this point, where we're at is getting legal advice on a policy. So since the policy has not been changed by this committee, the policy as it is printed on our website is what our policy is, unless that is in conflict with state law, in which case we have to follow state law. So that's where we're at. We follow the policy as it is written on our website, except where it doesn't follow state law, and then we follow state law.
Or you can take the state law part out of this and pass it with the state law, so we're in compliance with the state law, with number one, consistent with RSA 189:74, the board will provide opportunity for members of the public to comment on school board matters at all meetings, with the exception of emergency meetings called under RSA 91-A:2, Roman numeral 2, or at meetings for which the sole purpose is to address one or more issues in non-public under RSA 91-A:3. So you could take that out, what applies to the state law at this time, and then discuss everything at a later time if you want to amend the policy again. This way, we are in compliance with state law.
I'm going to strongly recommend that we not do that at this point without an attorney to tell us which parts are the legally required parts and which parts aren't, because frankly, I don't trust anyone in this room to make that decision, including myself.
Well, but you have the state law. All you have to do is put the state law right into it, 189:74.
Ms. Brown?
So I just wanted to clarify, is where this is going to be moved to January policy in the future, not before the meeting on Monday? I just.
As of right now, Ms. Clay said she's available to come Monday to speak with the board. Now,
But you don't have.
I need to follow up with her at this point and tell her what the policy committee has discussed tonight.
So I guess my question.
I'm not-
Are you going to try to push this through the full board without going through committee? Or is this going to return to committee when all the committee members are available to listen to the argument, listen to the attorney?
That's a good question. I am going to ask Attorney Clay for her advice as to what she thinks we ought to do with the policy and in following the law. And so whatever her advice is the information that will come back to the committee or the board. If she says, hey, no problem, let's just wait till January, then that's what I'll do, because that's why we have attorneys.
I understand that. And I believe in the previous meeting, you said that this entire policy had been vetted by an attorney. But my question is this an attempt to circumvent the committee by pushing this to the full board, as opposed to actually following our procedures and going through the honesty of what we're trying to do here?
No, and frankly, I'm quite disgusted and offended that you would bring that here. I only put it on this agenda because we had questions for an attorney. I wrote in a note to myself, contemporaneous to last time, it says 11/15/2022, invite attorney to provide advice and guidance, read public comments. And then I did, and then she emailed me, and I'm happy to share that email with you. It was actually Tara who emailed me this morning and said, Ms. Clay is ill, she cannot come. That's the whole story. And the suggestion that we would try and finagle something so that the whole board could have an opinion on something, but not specific individuals, is quite offensive. And I would not do that. At this point, I'm not going to have this policy discussed anymore. It is not something we're prepared to work on today, and we're going to move on to the next one. The next item on the agenda is BFE, Administration in Policy Absence. This is one that hasn't been updated since 2008, so it is far beyond the 4-year limit. This basically says that should the superintendent, should the board not have a policy for something or not have any direction to the superintendent needs to assume the responsibility for making his best judgment and or calling the board for an emergency meeting, which we have done in the past in emergency situations like COVID. So, Mr. Posca?
No, just exactly as you stated, and at this point, the recommendation is keep the policy as it is currently written.
Okay. Comments or questions? All right, then I move that we send policy BFE to the full board.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. You'll find a lot of them this month are these kind of older ones that needed to be reviewed. The next one is CA, admin goals. This one, I don't remember, I don't see any red lines. I had asked Mr. Posca and Dr. Andre to take a look at this one because we haven't actually looked at this policy in 14 years. Did you have any feedback from Dr. Andre?
No, I think, as you said, it's similar to the last policy. It had not been updated in quite some time. More or less, it outlines what the superintendent's goals is as stated, managing various departments, providing professional advice, overseeing the effectiveness of the learning programs that are in place in the district. So there's nothing major here. Upon the recommendation of Dr. Andre and myself, we'd like to keep this policy as it is.
Okay. Questions or comments on policy CA? No? Okay. I move that we send policy CA to the full board.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No? Okay. And I apologize, my thing just crashed, and I no longer have my agenda up. The next policy is DIE, which is audits. This is a fiscal policy that we had asked, Mr. Donovan to take a look at for us. Mr. Posca, while I'm pulling this back up, could you?
Yeah, and again, this is the policy that hadn't been updated in 15 years. I think it speaks to the fact that Mr. Donovan and his team continually do yearly audits on the accounts of the school department. This policy kind of recommends that we continue to that policy, which we are currently following. So there is no need to change the policy as it is, and it's being recommended to keep the policy as is at this time.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions on this one? Any finance type questions? No? Okay. So in that case, I move that we send policy DIE audits to the full board for approval.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. The next policy is policy EFDA, which is regarding student meal charges. This policy was reviewed by Ms. Daigle, our head of food services. Do we have EFDAR here? Yeah, we do. We also have EFDAR. And Ms. Daigle had provided some updates that you should see in red. And if I could just get this to come back up, I would look at it and highlight them for you. But in the meantime, Mr. Posca?
Sure, I think trying to update the student meal changes for the district. I think if there's some different policies or procedures in place at the elementary level versus the secondary level. I think what it outlines is if there's a student who doesn't have any and is requesting a meal at the elementary level, they'd be getting a meal based upon I think it's up to 3 of the cost of 3 full meals at that time, and it's a reimbursable meal, and one that is offered on a consistent basis, which consists of the sunflower butter and jelly, along with the daily vegetable and the fruit and milk. At the secondary level, if a student doesn't have any money in their account, they can be charged up to 2 of those meals before they receive a similar type of meal for the day. I think, again, it's something that's offered consistently on a regular basis. When we met with Ms. Daigle, she confirmed that this is on the menus at all the schools as offerings. There are students who do request this meal on a regular basis. It's not a large, number of students who do that, but there are students who do request this on a regular basis. I think as this happens, it goes into the unresolved debt, and then what happens there, and I think there was some concerns that were brought forth, how do we go about working with this? And I think there's a number of communications that go out on a regular basis to families regarding that the child owes money from the meals. At the elementary level, it's, there are messages that go, first of all, the food department will send out regular updates once a week. And I think those go out about Wednesdays. So whoever has a negative balance on Wednesdays, they receive a message via email from the food service department. The schools are also notified. There's a copy that gets into at the elementary level and goes home via backpack mail, requiring that. At the secondary level, when the student goes through in line, they're verbally told that they are that they owe money. In addition, they share that message with the school administrators, and the school administrators, it might be a principal, might be an assistant principal, it might be a counselor, will then try to reach out to the student and family and try to identify if there are any other concerns that we need to be aware of to try to support them in accessing maybe a free and reduced lunch packet and filling that out. So that's what's detailed really in this packet here.
Thank you, Mr. Posca. Mr. Posca and I had a long conversation about this policy. I had a lot of questions at the time. Does anybody else have any questions, or do you want me to dive into what I had?
You might as well dive in, because I've got a ton. So.
Okay. All right, do you want to start?
No, I'm hoping you answer my questions before I even have to.
Okay, so one of the things that Mr. Posca and I had talked about when we were meeting about this policy was regarding at what point do we involve debt collecting? Another question I had was regarding the financial operation of food services, and I learned that they are self-contained, which is reiterated to us at every single budget meeting. But at the same time, if they run over, that comes out of our operating budget. So we have to have some way. So some of the questions that I have for Mr. Posca were regarding things like, at what point are there triggers for when these things, when the emails go out, when counselors are involved? What other options do we have or supports do we have built into the school system to support families who might be struggling? And then I also wanted to know a little bit more about the social work aspect of supporting those families. So both financially, like, are there any programs in existence or that we could pick up again? And then also, what do we have to help families get, for example, the paperwork back in and those types of things? So I just threw a bunch at you. Do you remember all those answers off the top of your head, Mr. Posca?
We talked a lot about how we are working with United Way and other community organizations to identify food insecurities. I think at this time there is some, I believe it's the United Way who is working with and putting in freezers in some identified schools so meals can be sent home with students and families who have some food insecurities. It's also in place regularly at the high schools. I think you also talked about, the communication aspect of it, and again, it's one of the things that we've asked the schools to, the food department to do is to reach out to the schools themselves so that they can have individual conversations with these students. They know the students a lot better on a regular basis, so they can start that communication and provide the supports necessary if they are necessary, so that families can access the paperwork to complete the free and reduced lunch piece and fill out that paperwork as well. I think one of the things that we also talked about with Ms. Daigle is that, if a student is not completing that and they're at a loss, that money is just still there, but once they fill that paperwork out, or begin that paperwork process, then they are considered, having a free and reduced lunch access. What did I miss of your questions? I'm sorry.
That's okay. And then thresholds for when we reach out to families. I know on the My School Bucks app that, now we started this year the My School Bucks for the school meal lunch program. It's an app and you can load money onto it. And they send me a text when my kids' lunch balances are $10 or less. But I don't remember if that's something I set up or if that's something that came with the app.
Every Wednesday, there's the email from the food service department of a student who has a negative balance. I think it gets, they start to reach out to the schools when the balance gets over $20.
Okay. Okay. Ms. Darling?
So let's start with, what does the sentence, "Staff must take reasonable steps to minimize statements or actions that may overly identify children eligible for free meals," mean?
I think we're trying to be discreet and not to draw our attention to the students. I think, off the top of my head, I think our free and reduced, I don't want to I forget the number of what our population is, but we are also recognizing that percentage is probably higher because there are families who are reluctant to reach out. So That's why having some, those private conversations, we don't want some of the, cafeteria people to have these conversations, so we're asking our counselors and and some of our administrators to start having those conversations, so if there are concerns, how can we support them? So we don't want to draw our attention to it, unnecessary attention, but if there are needs, if there are services and supports that are needed, our school staff are some of those people who can then direct them along the right path to get the supports that are necessary to start that paperwork for free and reduced lunch.
All right, so just to make sure I understand correctly, it's basically staff is not going to announce to the world that this child needs this.
Correct.
When I read it, I was thinking it was trying to say they're supposed to be responsible for minimizing how often they ask families if they need assistance or anything like that. So I don't know if you guys would want to reword that to clarify or anything.
At the secondary level, a lot of times what will happen, parents may not know they're in their negative balance because, their child is now getting, 2, 3, 4, 5 bags of chips, and, mom and dad put X amount in thinking they're just getting a lunch and a snack, and they're still hungry and they continue to get snacks. So, it's just, when they're in line, the food service staff are just reminding them, okay, you owe $3 or whatever it might be. And so, the parent of a middle school student, how good that communication is coming from your child. So, they're getting it there, but then that's why the communication is going home from the food service department weekly of anyone who is in the negative. And hopefully that starts to generate some conversation. And then when that doesn't happen, if it gets up to $20, that's when we're getting school staff in to find out what if there are other areas of concern that we can support them with.
Yep. All right. And I have a note in my notes here from when Mr. Posca and I met last week regarding that, because that line was something that Ms. Daigle had added. And it was because the staff is getting yearly direct training, typically from the principal or another staff member, on how to talk to students about the fact that they're now in a negative lunch balance that doesn't call the attention of other students who might be in line.
Yeah.
Because we don't want the lunch lady to be overly zealous to the point where now a kid feels ashamed or uncomfortable or has any kind of peer impacts.
I would say if I had my way, it would make it so that the students, at least in elementary school, had no idea about a balance, if only because it's not on the child to know and understand that. And I can imagine that must be scary for a little kid when they're like, money. Yeah. The other question I had is I've noticed that there's a difference in the meal offerings between elementary and middle and high school, such as in middle and high school, there's not a breakfast and it's just the sandwich and water. Whereas in elementary school, they can still receive breakfast and the standard meal, which is the sandwich, as well as a vegetable, fruit, and milk. Is there a reason why we offer so much less to older growing students?
It has, go ahead.
No, I'm not. Go ahead, Dan. I hope you have a better answer than I do.
So, no, it has to do with the Healthy Hunger-Free Kids Act of 2010. And it has to do with the last few legal references in there. So there is the USDA SP 46 2016. So there are legal requirements for what lunches are required, nutritional requirements there are for different developmental stages of kids. So in elementary school, the federal government requires that they have a specific set of nutritional options, and for high school, it's less. Which, as a parent, I don't understand. Because you think that they're also growing in high school.
I was to say that I feel like they have much higher caloric needs as well as.
And it also goes to how much money we can get from the federal government in reimbursement. So we can get some money back for the standard meal with the standard amount of nutritional resources, but we can't get the extras back. So
how much would it cost us to feed every student?
It's in excess of $4 million a year. That was pre-COVID numbers. I know Alderwoman Shoshana Kelly and I and the Mayor's Youth Council had meetings before COVID hit because we were trying to craft a program here in Nashua. And back then, it was in excess of $4 million a year, and we didn't have the money. But at that time, we were also working with, the high school had a program called Meals That Matter, which was a student-run program. I don't remember who the faculty advisor was. Do you remember, Dottie? No? But basically, students created a 501(c) where they raised money and created like lunch vouchers, basically. So any student could go to guidance and get a ticket for lunch and then get a free lunch. And they did like all sorts of fundraisers, and it was a really cool program. But then COVID happened, and that program died because the kids who were running it graduated. And it didn't come back this year, and I don't even know who to talk to about it.
I'm not quite sure either, but I think that speaks to the conversation that we've also had about the communities, the community organizations that are coming into the schools and providing access, to food for students and families based upon their insecurity. So, although that program may have gone by the wayside, I think there are opportunities. Other community organizations have stepped up to fill the void that has been presented.
There's a program I've seen in other schools, of course, at the moment I can't think of one off the top of my head, where things like chips and everything were still $3, $4, $5, like overcharged even, but they always had fruit and vegetables available 100% free of charge. If a kid was hungry, did not matter what time it was, they could go to the cafeteria and say, can I get a snack? And they could get apples or a banana or
We used to have a grant program in some of the elementary schools for that, for fresh fruit and veggies, for snacks. And again, once we came back to school this year, I don't know what happened to a lot of those grant programs. It's been gone for, yeah.
I wonder what
Do you know where it
creating a
came from,
program-
Ms. Brown?
Trying to think of the name of it. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't recall off the top of my head. I know that, I'm pretty sure that's been gone for 3 years, because that was something that they had at several of the Title I schools.
Right, and they had it at Birch Hill too, before it was Title I.
And I can't remember the name of the program off the top of my head. I'm so sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I remember when the grant expired at some, but not others, and
And I actually continued to do the snack time program at some of the schools for a little while they had the resources to do it. It was pretty good. So every day, and that one was more about exposing kids. Sorry. That was more about exposing kids to different types of fruits and vegetables that they might not typically see in their homes. So that was really good. They would do sometimes it was apples and bananas, something that's a little more available, and other times it was, star fruit or cantaloupe or something like that. So it was a
Yeah.
pretty good program.
they did a lot of seasonal stuff too. I remember that. It was great.
So I don't want to jump over anybody, but I'm wondering if, in regards to I recognize that the reason that we limit the number of calories and different things like that is in regards to the Hunger Free Act. But I'm wondering if this particular policy, which is, I also had many of the same questions and many of the same, heartaches about making sure kids go unfed. I would like to actually wonder if there's something that we could continue to edit this moving forward in convergence with the Finance Committee maybe, and see if there's ways that we could find ways to, instead of meeting the minimum nutritional requirements in that act, if maybe we could, as a district, choose to give something better. I think particularly for high school students, I think, minimizing proteins and things like that is not generally good. And so I don't know if that's something that this committee would consider moving forward. I mean, I know that we need to make sure that there's a way to process the outstanding balances, and we need to make sure that we have procedures in place. I absolutely understand that. But I would actually like to see the district, even if we can't make free lunches for all, maybe at least improve the quality of lunches by maybe not being able to access as much of the federal reimbursements.
Ms. Johnson?
Yeah, we need those federal reimbursements because the food service is self-sustaining. And if you take it away, that's how most of them our employees are paid out of, and the raises come. And if you take that away, it's just like when you have special ed, and the IEPs are based on, some of it on Medicaid money. And if you don't have parents sign that, then we don't get paid. So we basically are bound by the USDA and what the minimum requirements are. But if you take all this away and you try to give more, we don't get paid, and then the food service goes into the budget, and now you have another line item that you have to raise the taxes on to pay for that line item. So it is a catch-22, but you have to understand that who pays us for what, and if you can't raise it, if that food shortage, food services is short, it comes out of another line item, or you have to generate it, most likely, to pay for that line item. So to play around with this, it sounds great, but you can't. We're under the federal guidelines here. If you do not want to deal with federal guidelines and you don't take any federal money to begin with, and you wash yourself of the federal government, and then they can't tell you what to do, how to teach the kids, how to feed the kids, and then the district becomes a truly local district here, and we do what we want to do, and you say to the feds, we don't want your money. But as long as you keep taking federal dollars, you're bound by what they tell us to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Thank you. I am interested, though, in maybe furthering a discussion at some point, whether it's this committee or through another venue, about some of the things. Like, I know that we've chosen Sun Butter as the alternate option because it's not something that kids typically have an allergy to. It doesn't typically run afoul of any religious or cultural eating needs. So,
But it's gross.
Actually, I think it's pretty good because, when you can't eat peanut butter and other things, you learn to like it, and it's not bad at all.
It's
because
more
you don't have
expensive
the
than peanut
allergies.
butter, but it doesn't, people
no
aren't allergic to
allergies.
it, so. And I know I was talking to Mr. Posca about sometimes the alternate sandwich is like ham, and a lot of our students can't eat that because of religious or dietary restrictions. So Sun Butter is a safe-ish alternative. But I would love to continue the discussion about how we as a community, whether with community partnerships or through the budgeting process, can invest a little bit more, because we know that hungry kids aren't as ready to learn as kids who aren't hungry. It's difficult to be your best self when your stomach is growling. So go ahead, Ms. Darling.
It's not even just being your best self. You're 2 times as likely to have health problems, asthma, anemia, anxiety. Food insecurity is a massive issue in this country, which has always kind of baffled me because it's the United States. How dare we have food insecurity issues? But for kids, it seems to be a common issue. And I am hoping that we can dive more into this and eventually, make things like make it so that fruits or vegetables are more freely available, easier to access. And I know that it would mean having to take money from another thing, and that's not necessarily not something that we can just do willy-nilly. There's so much cause and effect. And I hope we make it our priority in the future. But for tonight, the biggest things that I would really like to see is more equality between the elementary and middle school meals. I think that middle and high schoolers need breakfast. I think that they need, to take out the fruit and vegetable option really hurts my heart. And I also wonder how many families we have. I was looking at the free and reduced lunch and the income guidelines they use, and it's very similar, if not identical, to the same ones that DHHS uses for like food stamps and childcare, which means that once you've gone over income for one thing, you've gone over income for 6 things. You have now lost services everywhere. So for these families, on paper, it says they make enough money, but when you're suddenly having to deal with paying your insurance, your phone, your food, and then on top of it, kids' lunches, it can seem insane to sit there and look at that paper and go, how do I not qualify? And I mean, at $35,000 is when I hit the first point where I lost lunches. And it's scary how quickly that number can add up. And granted, I do believe, and for anyone paying attention and listening, our food service department is wonderful and absolutely will work with you. I used to pay in literally the change out of my pockets every week, and they never made me feel guilty about it, which was nice. So I don't know what that would cost. And
So I think that that's a good, I see Mr. Posca taking notes. I think it's a good thing that perhaps we could ask Ms. Daigle and Mr. Donovan to come back with some financial information for us, for our own knowledge and edification. I don't know if that's something that's quick and easy to look up that he would have, like Monday night, when we are at the full board meeting, or if it's something that we'd have to come back to at the next meeting. But I do think it would be interesting to look at that and look at what the options are, and what the options are for maybe creating a coalition, because I think some of this discussion is bigger than just this committee and even bigger than just our board, because other states have more resources. But to go back to how great our food service department is, this is not something that is unusual for them to deal with. Pre-COVID, 44% of our students were on free and reduced lunch. Some of our schools, it's up to 85%, and some of our schools, it's as low as 30%. But the average for the entire district is 44%. So this isn't something that's only affecting a handful of kids. This is half of our families. So go ahead, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. I think what we need to do is deal with this policy the way it is, the way it is written. Reach out, have Mr. Posca reach out, go to like the United Way and some other organizations and see if they can work with the district and do, to get some services into the schools for some of these meals. I think that's the best way at this point in time.
I agree with you. So with that, I'll make a motion to send it to the full board as is, and then come back with the other information over time.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor of moving it to the full board, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? I'm sorry.
I did say aye.
Okay. 3-0. All right, thank you. Okay.
Ms. Raymond, I don't think I'm doing enough service for the amount of community organizations who are supporting our schools, and I don't think I'm sharing that as well as I can. So I think as part of some of the notes I had here is kind of trying to provide an overview of that maybe at one of our upcoming meetings, because I think to Ms. Johnson's point, there are a lot of organizations who are helping our students and our families. I don't have that list in front of me, but they are readily available and readily willing to help. So in addition to reaching out to Mr. Donovan, Ms. Daigle, I'll talk to Dr. Andre about trying to have kind of some type of list or menu of what we currently offer.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I know Mr. Renke from the Soup Kitchen and Shelter came and gave us a great presentation one day at our full board meeting in, September or October, about it was like 12 different community agencies that he was working with to do some of those take-home meals. We have the 68 Hours of Hunger and the United Way that provide bags of groceries for the weekends to make sure kids are, but we also on this board are concerned about when kids are in school. And I, personally, I'm also concerned about how much our staff does, because we have such phenomenal staff. I know so many teachers and nurses and administrators throughout the district who are keeping snacks in their desks.
Yeah.
They have like their secret stash of granola bars and other things because nobody wants our kids to go hungry. But if there's a way that we can make that cost burden a little bit easier for everybody, I think it would be great to look into that as we move forward. So
I will be bringing this up on Monday night, but just so that you guys know, not only are there absolutely so many organizations out there that help with these issues with any families that they work with. I know NeighborWorks has been helping families that they work with help pay off their unpaid balances. But I also recently found out that people in the public can actually call a school and say, hey, do you have students who have unpaid balances on lunch? And it's a way, I always look for ways to donate within my community. I don't believe in donating to the big organizations. I think they get enough money at the end of the year. And usually it's the Arlington Street Community Center for me, that's my heart, but When I found that out, I know this year my Christmas donation will be going to help pay for a family's unpaid balance. And, you don't know anything about this family, you just know that when their kid goes home before Christmas, that they're going to have that news, and that's one less thing on their shoulders.
So we should probably advise people to call either their local school or call the main office at Ledge Street, right? The 966-1000 number?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So the next policy is EFDA-R, which is procedures regarding student meal charges. And if you look in your packet, these were in the packet, they were in the opposite order that we have talked about them. We kind of skipped over EFDA-R and went right to EFDA, and then kind of now we're skipping back 2 pages. So this is just the procedure that goes along with that policy that specifies specifically exactly what we want our staff to be doing. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that one?
No.
Okay. So I move that we send EFDA-R to the full board.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. All right. Our last policy this evening is a doozy. This is policy ILBAS. This is one that has been kind of hanging out there since 2018. There were some significant updates to the statewide assessment, how they were conducted, like the SAS test, all that kind of stuff. There were some changes to laws. So there's quite a bit of red in here, and I know that this is something that Mr. Posca has been working on for a little bit. So I'm just going to send it over to Mr. Posca to explain it to us.
I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. I think in essence, what we're trying to do is just document the policy that we are conducting SAS, our SAS assessments on an annual basis. By law, RSA 193C, we have to promote that. In addition, as part of that, we also have to make sure we include the exemption of student participation if a parent decides to opt out their child. The challenge with that is the state is also advocating and mandating that we have 95% participation in these tests as well.
Did you say 95%?
95%.
What happens if we don't? Sorry.
No, that's my question. I don't think we had 95%
We
the
have
last.
not, I think last year we were around 85%. So we have been below that. I think, if that continues the trend, I think that could probably be a discussion with the state about why our students are opting out, what we're doing for it. I think what this, we are following the policy, when as far as when we're promoting and telling our families about this, we are providing them access to the opt-out form that can be filled out. That was part of the packet as well. So you can usually, there's some type of link or some type of communication that's sent home with families regarding SAS testing, so they can access that, and that must be filled out and completed and returned to the child sending school, informing them their decision to opt out of the process.
Interesting. So we have to have 95% of students take the test. So if 15% of if more than 5% of our students, families decide to opt out, then we're not in compliance. I'd be really fascinated to hear what the spread is across the state. Like if there are districts that are meeting that 95% threshold and what they're doing differently than what we're doing.
I don't have that state data in front of me. I think it's been certainly through COVID. That was, and there was some waivers granted through that. And I think I think a lot of it has to do with, what happens when we don't meet that. It could be some of the federal funds that might be coming from the federal government could be withheld based upon participation. However, with that being said, COVID, there were some waivers granted. I think we've gotten communication from the New Hampshire Education Department that waivers not be granted going forward. Based upon, coming out of the pandemic. So we had to update this policy to demonstrate that we are in compliance with the policy and we have a form. Additionally, we've had, some work with the New Hampshire Department of Education regarding our own internal policies and procedures that we've updated over the last year or so to make sure we're in compliance with their recommendations as well.
I'm going to go to the committee first, and then I'll come back to Ms. Brown. So I'm just going to go around Ms. Johnson, then Mr. Arling, then Ms. Brown.
If this is a state law, then how do we get federal funds involved in this? If it's federal, the federal funds would come. If not, then the state wouldn't send us funding if we're not in compliance. This is a question you have to ask an attorney. Not so much on number one on the policy. This is the one you ask the attorney about, that if we're not in compliance, if parents don't want their kids to go through the assessment, and we fall below that 95% threshold, what happens to our state funding because parents don't want their kids to take the assessment? They want them exempt. That's a good question for legal, whether it's New Hampshire School Board Association or down at City Hall, because we can't force parents to have their kids take the assessment. Am I correct?
I think you've talked about the elephant in the room, and earlier this year, we did get some communication from the Department of Education, and I think they were just as, kind of covering themselves, but also kind of identifying that, given that we anticipate U.S. congressional leaders and USED, we're looking closely at each state's assessment statewide and their participation rate. So I think they're kind of trying to read the room themselves to see what these rates are and what the, do we have, kind of to Ms. Raymond's point made earlier, are there different pockets that are very high or very low, to kind of understand what the bigger picture is and what the story is in each of these districts or communities or regions.
I like to see, a full year of school being open, coming back in and seeing what our assessments are in math, language it is, and science.
Correct.
I'm curious to see where we're at this point. Are we still below? Or have we brought these kids up a little bit? Because being out of school for that, year and a half, basically, remote, and then coming in and semi-remote, and then coming back and masking them and everything. It was a lot of, we talk about trauma. That's what the trauma was with these kids, being out, the psychological piece on all this, not being able to see their friends. That concerns me a lot. But then there are parents that do not want their kids to take the state assessment. And if we fall below, we don't want our funding to be cut.
Yep.
So I think that really is the legal question of the hour.
Yeah,
Where do we go from here?
the last technical advisory the DOE sent out regarding it goes back to what we were talking about a few meetings ago regarding underperforming schools. So depending on how your school ranks on the SASs, how many students pass the SAS, what their percentile is whether or not you get that underperforming school. But for every percentage point below 95% who participate in it, they calculate an extra 0 in there. So if you had, according to the technical assistance bulletin put out October 25th, 2018, if 90% of the students participated instead of 95, then they add 5% of zeros, as though 5% of the students who took it got zeros on it. So then you could end up with an underperforming school rating and then have to have a plan.
And I think that speaks to both what you, Ms. Johnson, Ms. Raymond, talking about. I think it will lead to some increased scrutiny from the Department of Education about why our participation rates are where they are. It will also kind of talk into, when you look at, our identified schools, what is participation rate there, and what do those cohorts look like as we get into kind of delving into it. And it could be the state just asking, what was your plan? And I think, right now, following this policy, we can demonstrate we are following the statewide policy about what we have to do. And I think that leads to further discussion of why our parents may be opting out their students.
Yeah, it says if you miss it for 3 consecutive years for one or more students groups, they'll be notified that they have a consistently underperforming student group, which makes the school eligible for targeted support and interventions, and the school would need to implement a targeted improvement plan. Interesting. Okay. Ms. Darling?
I don't have a question so much as a comment. This is, to put it respectfully, ridiculous. I think by 2022, we should all know that a standardized test does not measure a child's learning, a teacher's ability to teach, a school's ability to teach, what a child is going through at home versus at school. The fact that we still live in a world that assigns a dollar amount to that is just beyond me. Now, that I have gotten that a bit out there, sorry, Caden, who is watching right now, you will have to do the SAST testing from now on. I don't think I could in good conscience excuse you from it, knowing that it could potentially hurt funding for schools, which is too bad because we all know that, like most teenage boys, he is vindictive, and if he knows he has to take the test, he's gonna bomb it. So, the fact that things like this exist really bothers me. However, I understand that's not within our control, our power. Thank you for allowing me to vent for this moment.
All right, so I'm just, I had just Googled that, not RSA, technical advisory, so I just wanted to note where the site is so I remember. Okay, any other, oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Brown.
So, not to be contrary. Oh, sorry, not to be contrary. So the other side of that, I do recognize that a standardized test is not the be-all, end-all that of a student's ability to learn and perform. But we actually have been talking about this a lot in the curriculum committee, so this is actually one of the reasons I wanted to stick around and talk about this. So one of the we've actually have some schools that are high-performing schools typically who have had lower participation and now have moved up the list to be identified for supports that they actually might not need, or might not need to waste time developing a plan for that. One of the good things, and I understand, I think 95 seems it's very high, and then giving people zeros for the undone test also seems a little unfair. However, you do want a big sample size, so then you can also find out where those classes and students need help. If you've got one particular school that's doing excellent in reading, but their math is very low, you really know where you need to push your professional development and where you need to target supports. Vice versa, or if you've got a particular cohort of, if you watch a trend of kids in 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade, and they all seem to be doing, having a difficult time with reading comprehension all in the same tests, you know that could actually be a problem with the curriculums you're using, or things like that. So, whereas, it's not fun, it takes time away from the great part of learning, but it is also necessary to use the assessments as a benchmark, not for teacher quality or student performance, but for just to make sure that we're planning for the future and we're targeting our supports the way they need to be spent. So it's not always negative. Now, so that's my one point. My other point is I'm curious about, I have a question about the line in here for the exemptions for parents. It says they must complete, we're moving it from the National School District shall accept any written communication, whether by letter, email, letter or by email from a guardian, and removing it to must complete a form provided by the school. Can I ask, in the newer version, can I ask, is that the new RSA, or is that something that we added in, moving it to the form that must be completed? And will the form be available both electronically and hard copy?
Yes, this is part of RSA 193-C:6, so that's where the verbiage for that comes from. Historically, I'll just go, last year we have provided electronically hard copies, not trying to, hide it from anyone, but make it accessible for those and providing it in native languages.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? And you can see the form, for those who are interested, we did include the form in the packet right after the policy so that people can see it and know that that's what the state requires. Any other questions or comments about the ILBAS, the statewide assessments? Nope. Okay, so I move that we send ILBAS to the full board.
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay. So that's what I've got for now, and then our next meeting for this won't be till January. So I don't know what the policy committee will look like. I don't know what the board leadership will look like. I don't, any of that stuff. So hopefully we'll get those forms Monday or soon to fill out for committee assignments for 2023, because we always like to let people have a chance to choose committees that they're interested in. And then we will keep moving on. Any other questions tonight? Nope? Okay. So given that,
Make a motion to adjourn.
thank you.
Second.
All in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 We are adjourned at 7:05 PM.